Hitler is all of Germany. The newspaper headline on August 4th, 1934, reflected the vital shift in power that had just taken place. 2 days earlier, on the death of Reich President Paul von Hindenburg, Hitler had lost no time in abolishing the Reich Presidency and having the army swear a personal oath of unconditional obedience to him as the Führer of the German Reich and People. He was now head of state and supreme commander of the armed forces, as well as head of government and of the monopoly party, the NSDAP. Hitler had total power in Germany, unrestricted by any constitutional constraints. The headline implied even more, however, than the major change in the constellation of power. It suggested an identity of Hitler and the country he ruled, signifying a complete bond between the German people and Hitler. The referendum that followed on August 19, 1934, to legitimize the power political change that had occurred, aimed at demonstrating this identity. Hitler for Germany, all of Germany of Hitler, ran the slogan. As the results showed, however, reality lagged behind propaganda. According to the official figures, over a sixth of voters defied the intense pressure to conform and did not vote yes. In some big working-class areas of Germany, up to a third had not given Hitler their vote. Even so, there were one or two tantalizing hints that Hitler's personal appeal outstripped that of the Nazi regime itself, and even more so of the party. For Adolf Hitler, yes, but 1,000 times no to the brown bigwigs was scribbled on one ballot paper in Potsdam. The same sentiment could be heard elsewhere. Beneath the veneer of Führer adulation, constantly trumpeted by the uniform propaganda of the mass media, there are numerous indicators that Hitler's appeal remained far less than total, even in what later memory often recalled as the good years of the mid-1930s. One example of strong criticism leveled at Hitler can be seen in a report from the Gestapo in Berlin in March 1936. Hitler's toleration of the corruption and luxury lifestyle of the party bigwigs at a time when poor living standards still afflicted most ordinary Germans was, the report noted, heavily criticized. Why does the Führer put up with that? Was a question on many people's lips, noted the report, and it was evident the trust of the people in the personality of the Führer is currently undergoing a crisis. Why did Adolf Hitler come to power? Knowing the why is crucial to understanding the fall to terror. Historic trials such as Nuremberg offer insights on how cults and political parties formed and worked. Documents and texts produced by such parties, cults and organizations, written by the foot soldiers and ordinary men and women who decided to go and work in the killing fields of Nazi Germany, Poland, and other places are, however, more difficult to come across. When Hitler decided on the systematic extermination of the Jews, why did the ordinary Germans actively participate in the plan? How ordinary were the Nazi executioners? From the Nazis' rise to power it's important to examine why middle-class youth, farmers, bank clerks, soldiers in their millions between 1928 and 1933 joined the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party and transformed it into a political movement that would scare the world. Theodor Abel, a Columbia University sociologist, collected these first-person accounts in order to ask, what motivated the ordinary Germans to become Nazis? Why was National Socialism an attractive political movement? Abel proposed an essay contest for the best personal life history of an adherent of the Hitler movement, with cash prizes for the most detailed and trustworthy accounts. The participants had to provide full details of their family life, education, economic conditions, memberships in associations, participation in the Hitler movement, and important experiences, thoughts, and feelings about events and ideas in the post-World War One world. Abel's aim was to understand from these autobiographies the reasons why people flocked to Hitler. The result of this massive project was Abel's Why Hitler Came into Power, a unique and frightening text from within the minds and consciousness of people who went on to become Nazis. Here is why it was a manufactured consensus, a propaganda construct with repression of political opponents, racial enemies, and other outsiders to the proclaimed national community as the other side of the coin. The Superman image of Hitler amounted to the central component of the fabrication. Already before the takeover of power, it had been the creation of the most modern, hugely successful political marketing strategy of its time, masterminded by Goebbels. And once the monopoly of state control of propaganda fell into Nazi hands in 1933, there was no obstacle in the mass media to the rapid spread of Hitler's charismatic appeal. But even the slick and sophisticated techniques behind the creation of the Führer myth would have been ineffective had not fertile terrain been prepared long before Hitler became Reich Chancellor. Expectations of national salvation were by 1933 widespread, not just among Nazi supporters, and had already become vested in the person of Hitler. By the time that he took power, over 13 million voters had at least partially swallowed the Führer cult, which was more fully embraced by the huge mass membership of the party and its myriad subordinate affiliations. The organizational basis was therefore laid for the wider transmission of the Führer cult. Given the failure of Weimar democracy and the crisis conditions in which the Hitler government came to power, it was clear that if the new Reich Chancellor could swiftly attain some successes, he would substantially increase his popularity. The scope for the rapid widening of the adulation of Hitler, the winning of the majority who had not voted for him in March 1933, had been laid. The speed with which the Hitler cult now spread has to be seen from this background, as well as from the masterly deployment of propaganda imagery. There were a number of crucial areas where Hitler could win great support by acting in what seemed to be the national, not partisan party political interest, and through converting his image from that of party to national leader. Even his opponents recognized the growth of his popularity. The exiled social democratic organization, the Zapade, based in Prague, acknowledged in April 1938 the widely held view it had repeatedly echoed that Hitler could count on the agreement of the majority of the people on two essential points. 1, he had created jobs, and 2, he had made Germany strong. In Auschwitz, in a Primo Levi episode that would provide the most horrific slogan, the thirsty Levi breaks off an icicle to quench his thirst. A Nazi guard snatches away the icicle, and the bewildered Levi asks, "Why?" The guard responds, "Here, there is no why." That such an event came to pass merits, however, a why question. Midway through his book, Abel asks the why of the Hitler movement. He offers 4 responses. 1. The prevalence of discontent with the existing social order. 2. The particular ideology and programs for social transformation adopted by the Nazis. 3. The National Socialist organizational and promotional technique. 4. The presence of charismatic leadership. We can see the answers to the why from the accounts in the volume. It is to be kept in mind that these accounts are about the why of joining the Nazis well before the Second World War started, but it requires only a small imaginative leap to ask the same people who joined totalitarian parties hate mobs and such organizations even today. Abel demonstrates how discontent offered a common focus for many oppositions and made concerted action on a large scale possible. Discontent on the part of individuals had a direct effect upon their subsequent joining of the Nazi movement, writes Abel. Hitler projected national unity was based on a racial doctrine, the idea that common blood binds individuals into a Gemeinschaft or community, that racial intermixture is the cause of disunity as well as the deterioration of native stock. A worker's autobiographical account in Abel's book states, and I quote, "Faith was the one thing that always led us on, faith in Germany, faith in the purity of our nation, and faith in our leader. Someday the world will recognize that the Reich we established with blood and sacrifice is destined to bring peace and blessing to the world." An account by an anti-Semite records how he listened to speeches about the Jewish conspiracy, prosperity, and threat. At a gathering, he records, "Everyone cried, 'Out with the Jew.' The mass media contributed to the general feeling. Every honest German artisan was of the firm conviction that everything printed in a newspaper was true." The man writes, "In Germany, everything in politics and economics at that time depended on Jews. And so, I occupied myself with the Jewish problem." He decides, "Fight against the Jew by all means, as the embodiment of wickedness and evil." When he first read Mein Kampf, he was, and I quote, "gripped by the greatness of thoughts. I was eternally bound to this man. Hitler," the man concludes, quote, "was given to the German nation as our savior, bringing light into darkness." The account by a soldier describes the corruption in German Marxism and how, when he embraced Nazism, he found his Gemeinschaft. The sacrifices, he writes, were born for the sake of this Gemeinschaft. Hitler's call to duty was enough, he writes, "Honors and dignities do not matter. All that counts is that as soldiers of the front, we keep our promise to Germany." The leader is calling, gun in hand, and everything else falls away. The story of a middle-class youth is the autobiography of a young man's discovery of National Socialism. His conversion makes him realize, "I made up my mind that I would have to choose between politics and family." Enrolled in the party, he describes how the Führer had promised to bring freedom and food to the German people. In the countryside, the peasants clung to the Führer with reverence and love, and even in the larger cities, the working class raised its hand in respect to him. For the middle-class youth, we will find strength in our Führer, who arouses in us the slumbering ideals of Germanic freedom and heroism. From these accounts, we can see the answer to the why. Why the middle-class youth, the worker, the soldier, all took to National Socialism and then to Hitler. Given an enemy, a purpose, an ideology, and a charismatic leader, the ordinary German found a route to glory and prosperity for the entire race. And nothing would hinder the march on that route. It is on that march, unstoppable, brutal, often inexplicable, that, when faced with the bewildered Jew's question, why, the Nazi was able to respond without hesitation, "Here, there is no why." Why do we need to understand the why? Abel's collection provides astonishing first-hand accounts of the process and cultural psychological conditioning through which the ordinary Germans were able to explain, defend, and even rationalize to themselves and to those who listened the extermination of the Jews and the need for war. Melita Mashman, a propagandist in Nazi Germany, in account rendered, A Dossier on My Former Self, writes, "On the night of the broken glass, our feelings had not yet hardened to the sight of human suffering as they were later during the war. Perhaps if I had met one of the persecuted and oppressed, an old man with the fear of death in his face, perhaps..." This is another of the responses, alongside the many in Abel's work, to the why. The depersonalization and dehumanization of the enemy, reducing them to an unimportant life form so that there was no guilt in the Nazi when executing or torturing them, is captured in Maschmann's memoir. In his interviews, available in Gita Sereni's Into That Darkness, An Examination of Conscience, Franz Stangl, the commandant of Treblinka, the largest of the extermination camps, described how he began his career in the police, flushing out villains here and there. It was all good experience, and I knew it wouldn't hurt my record. His interviewer Sereni notes how, however terrible the stories he was telling, Stangl was constantly to fall back into police jargon. He was a villain's. Later, when asked how he could take part in the extermination, Stangl says, "It was a matter of survival. The only way I could live was by compartmentalizing my thinking. If the subject was the government, the object the Jews, and the action the gassings, then I could tell myself that for me, the fourth element, intent, was missing." In a nation's history, when discourses of dehumanization, metaphors of animalization, and excess of minorities are employed against communities, then we should recall how the ordinary men and women in Nazi Germany came to accept that the extermination of a race was integral to their nation. When we see cults and politics, and they become interchangeable after a point, offering answers to the why in the form of scapegoating or victim blaming, we are on the cusp of disaster. The intent, as Stangl claims, is missing because he, like all Nazis, was trying to survive. However, Goldhagen, in his book examining the why, again, of every man's participation in the genocide, argues that acts of initiative, Germans who on their own set out to torture and kill, and excesses are really both acts of initiative, not done as the mere carrying out of superior orders. He proposes that whatever the cognitive and value structures of individuals may be, changing the incentive structure in which they operate might, and in many cases will certainly induce them to alter their actions. In a debate at the Holocaust Museum with Christopher Browning, author of Ordinary Men, Reserve Police Battalion 101 and the Final Solution in Poland, Holocaust scholar Lawrence Langer and others, Goldhagen would put it pithily. The German perpetrators, namely those who themselves killed Jews or helped to kill them, willingly did so because they shared a Hitlerian view of Jews, and therefore believed the extermination to be just and necessary. Incentive structures and the vision offered by leaders that rewire the cognitive include the law refusing to take its course, rewards by the party or organization, even a career. Such structures embolden and produce the initiative to go after the Jews that Goldhagen saw in the ordinary Germans. This is an initiative that has been tragically replicated since then. Heroes pointing guns at enemies in public spaces, hate speech targeting communities, law enforcement officials rewarded in their careers for being biased against communities, and others. If there is a reward in selling someone down the river, the cognitive dissonance that otherwise would prevent inhuman behavior is no longer in operation. There is no why in the minds of the perpetrators because the why has been provided for by the party, the cult, the leader. This is not to say that they have signed away their minds. Rather, the minds have been rewired through regular dollops of incentives, immunity from prosecution, and the whys provided top-down. Clearly, the ordinary Germans no longer needed to ask why, since the incentive structures of pure Gemeinschaft, race or nation, the illusion of prosperity for the pure, are adequate to alter cognitive and value systems. What Abel's documentation of the ordinary as excess, like Goldhagen's, teaches us is this: if we do not ask why, the heinous actions we see around us will be explained as why not. Conclusion. By the mid-1930s at the latest, the narcissistic trait in his own personality, the extreme flattery and sycophancy that surrounded him, and the immense adulation of the masses that repeatedly stimulated him combined to magnify the belief that Germany's destiny lay in his own hands, and that he alone could guide his country to final victory in the ever closer great conflict. It depends essentially on me, on my being, on my political skills, he told his generals on the eve of the war. He stressed, as part of this reasoning, the fact that no one else will ever have the trust of the whole German people as I do. There will never be a man in the future who has more authority than me. My being is therefore a huge value factor. No one knows how much longer I will live. Therefore, it is better to have the conflict now. By this time, August 1939, all sections of the regime and the masses who had been so jubilant at Hitler's every success had ensured that their fate was tied to the decisions of the Führer. So it would remain until 1945. In the wartime years, a seemingly glorious victory gave way to mounting, inexorable calamity, as defeat on defeat inevitably eroded the charismatic basis of his leadership, and as it became plain that he was leading Germany into the abyss, the fateful bonds with Hitler that had been sealed in the good years of the 1930s ensured that there was now no way back. The German people, having supported Hitler's triumphs, were now condemned to suffer the catastrophe into which he had led them.